people understand general intelligence, which is the ability to learn, to apply knowledge, and to solve problems. But there's a different type of intelligence, the one that enables people to show empathy toward others, to reflect on our lives in relation to others, and through self-awareness, regulate our own emotions, and that is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is defined as a way of recognizing, understanding our own personalities and natures, how we think, feel, and act. It shapes our interactions with others and our understanding of ourselves. It defines how and what we learn. It allows us to set priorities. It determines the majority of our daily actions. According to leading emotional intelligence expert Joshua Friedman, research suggests emotional intelligence is responsible for as much as 80% of the success in our lives. When we begin to notice and recognize ourselves in relation to others and the world, we can positively or negatively affect the world and those around us. Emotional intelligence is what enables us to live fully into our values. Without it, what we say we believe in and what we stand for would be but words drifting in the wind. While the area of emotional intelligence is a vast field of study with many strands, there are some strands that stand out for me, namely our ability to self-reflect and to regulate our own emotions, particularly around the ability to show empathy, kindness, and compassion toward others. Having empathy and compassion and being able to demonstrate them enables us to communicate better, to connect, to companion, and to challenge each other in healthy ways. Social neuroscience is a relatively new field of study that seeks to understand the relationship between biological mechanisms and social behavior between two or more people. It posits that our natural default as humans is toward empathy, expressed in our helping, our responding to pain, or to someone who in need. It is something that lies deep within each of us. Showing empathy, and here I connected with compassion, is a crucial way of bringing meaning to our own lives as well as to the lives of others. We are by nature empathetic and altruistic creatures. At least this is the argument. And to break down the distinction, I believe empathy is when you feel or resonate with someone's story. Compassion, one can feel deeply without ever knowing the story. Empathy through emotional intelligence can be a positive force in people's lives and the world. And while some people are more apt in demonstrating it, it is something that most can cultivate and activate by choice. And I'll say more to this point later. Having grown up in Christian fundamentalism and then embracing a more progressive religious expression, I have a new appreciation for the life and work of Jesus. The uniquely human Jesus was truly an amazing person. Looking at his work with the eyes and understanding I now have, I can see how he truly mastered and walked in emotional intelligence. We've all heard the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus tells the parable in response to a question from a lawyer who asked him, "Who is my neighbor?" after Jesus had urged his followers to love one's neighbor as oneself. The parable depicts a traveler who is beaten, stripped of his clothing by robbers, and then left for dead alongside the road. First, a Jewish priest noticed the victim, but walks to the other side of the road. Then a Levite comes by and does the same thing, avoiding the man. Finally, a Samaritan, a member of a group that was often despised by the Jews for their impure lineage and religious heresy, happens upon the traveler. He treats the man's wounds, transports him to a care facility, and then pays for his continued health care. Of course, we all know the moral of this story. The neighbor figure in the parable is the one who shows mercy to the injured fellow man. That is the Samaritan. While both the Levite and the priest saw the injured man, and while service to others was their primary work, neither did anything to help the injured man. The question is, why? But we have all been in situations like this ourselves, right? The other day, I was working on a project and my daughter came in and she was trying to have a conversation with me and I wasn't fully present. She began to say, "Daddy, Daddy, Daddy." And then finally she said, "Randy." I had taught her this a long time ago. If you want to interrupt what someone is doing or saying, just call their name. People usually stop mid-sentence or whatever they're doing at the hearing of their own names. I've seen this with newscasters as well when they want to interrupt one of their guests. To my chagrin, she has been using it ever since. Now, I recognize that she was trying to get my attention away from what I was doing for myself. I was busy doing what I needed to do. Even though I had heard her, I didn't want to engage her. I chose not to give her my full attention. And this is something that we do every day. We shut off that gauge. We get busy with the world around us, and sometimes we can get lost in our own feelings and doings that we don't notice that we are not actively noticing. Or perhaps we refuse to allow ourselves to notice in a way that would then require us to act. In a 2001 TED Talk, psychologist and award-winning author of emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman, tells a story about him heading down to a New York subway and noticing a shirtless man bent over, lying on the ground, and people, hundreds of them, walking by and stepping over the shirtless man. None inquired as to his well-being. He indicated that since he had been exploring his own awareness and unawareness, he stopped to check on the man. And when he did, it was contagious. Immediately others stopped and also noticed. The man was Hispanic, spoke no English, had no money, and had been wandering the streets for days and then collapsed from hunger. After those who stopped attended the man with food and drink, the man was refreshed and soon back on his feet. They recognized the man in that shared moment which connected them all together, and they responded. I've wondered why some people are not morally outraged by the caging of children on our border, or when there are injustices done toward people of color. Is it possible that they in fact do notice the child seeking attention, the beggar on the street, and the children in cages? Perhaps we all notice, but we readily turn off our antennas as to not give our full attention to what needs to be seen. Because when we see, when we notice, there's the call, the responsibility to act. Maybe we turn it off because we don't feel that it's always a safe place for us to be. Maybe we feel it's someone else's job to act. At times, some of us may get tired of always having to do the right thing. Our ability to regulate our emotions makes us truly remarkable beings, and at the same time also can make us quite menacing. There are those who possess higher degrees of emotional intelligence, who have chosen to use their ability to read people to then manipulate them for their own satisfaction and personal gain. Goldman also told the story about his brother-in-law who sat for an interview with the Santa Cruz Strangler. When his brother-in-law finally got around to asking the killer why he did what he did and whether he felt anything for his victims, the killer told him, "Oh no, I couldn't have done what I did without first turning that part of me off." Any empathetic feelings for his victims, which included his mother and his grandparents, had to be turned off. This is what happened in the Samaritan story. Not to imply that the priest and the Levite were akin to a serial killer, but to simply acknowledge that people often turn off their ability to show empathy. This helps to answer the question of why. Why we struggle when we have an opportunity to help. We sometimes do, and then other times we do not. In their 2002 work, psychologists Delroy Paulus and Kevin Williams proposed the so-called dark triad, the three prominent personality traits that are offensive but not pathological. The dark triad includes Machiavellianism, that is, an inclination to strategically exploit and deceive others; narcissism, a sense of entitled self-importance; and psychopathy, a tendency towards callousness and cynicism. Building on their work, author and Columbia University psychologist Scott Barry Kaufman developed the light triad as balance to the dark triad. The light triad consists of faith in humanity, believing in the fundamental goodness of humans; humanism, valuing the dignity and worth of each human being; and Kantianism, treating people as ends in themselves, not means to an end. Kaufman and his colleagues concluded in the 2020 paper that social trust and affiliation with others and a relatively lower expression of an antagonistic and exploitative orientation appears to be a particularly productive path to personality development, life satisfaction, and a deeper connection with humanity. Kaufman designed a survey entitled Light versus Dark Side of the Force test that scores users on 6 personality facets, 3 from both the so-called light and dark triads. According to the survey results, women tend to be leaning toward more of the light triad than men, as do people in their older age. U.S. senators, unsurprisingly, not so much. If you want to take the survey for yourself, the URL is posted at the bottom of the screen. Perhaps equally crucial is a realization that our dark side is not something we should seek to suppress. People who try to feel more closely to what they think society or others want to embrace about them tend to try to cut out their negative traits or darker sides. But as Kaufman says, complete suppression never works. The truth will always find a way of popping back, sometimes in full force. Harnessing your dark side is essential to becoming a whole person. Kaufman believes that the dark side played an important role in motivating people to join the civil rights movement and to fight for social justice. He adds that channeling your aggression toward real injustices in the world and integrating that into your higher level goal is important. This year, our nation, the world has gone through crisis after crisis, and many of us are feeling deeply and desperate for some semblance of a return to normal. So right now I have a compound question I want to ask each of you, not for you to answer out loud, but simply to ponder, because I believe that it goes to the very heart of emotional intelligence and how we relate to one another, how we see and feel. Here's the question. What emotion, what feeling do you recall having when you heard the news that President Trump was infected with COVID-19? Did you feel sadness, anger, compassion, fear, grief, relief, glee? Think about that for a moment. I want to be vulnerable with you about what I felt. First, I examined my feelings. I was fully aware that what I was feeling didn't align with my stated values. I visited the pain that some of the president's words have caused in me. I examined the anger that some of his actions have created in me. Then I held them up to the light of the compassion that is my calling as minister, father, husband, brother, and son. I can say I struggled with both my dark and light sides and the emotional choices that were before me. I realized that at that moment I was not willing to show empathy or to allow myself to feel compassion. But I also understood my responsibility, not solely to others, but to my own heart, to pull the pendulum back toward my center, toward the feeling that would allow for compassion for the president and for any others, not for their sake, but for my own. My values tell me that the president and those on the socio-political opposite are not my enemies, even if there are those who would want to harm or oppress me because of who I am, who I love, or what I stand for. They are not my enemies. They are the ones who have chosen not to allow empathy and compassion to reign in their lives, and most likely have embraced the more darker aspects of who they are. They do more harm to themselves. Austrian neurologist, psychiatrist, and Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl stated, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." To be successful in this life, we must remind ourselves of our values. We who are willing to notice and then to act when others are in need. We are the Samaritans in the story. In my understanding, the biggest part for the Samaritan was not him tending to the man's pain, paying for his health care, but rather it was him first noticing, seeing the man, and caring enough to stop whatever was going on in his life. I can tell you this, as a person of color, it is of great importance to be seen. But not seen in the eyes of someone's biases or stereotypes, but rather as one should be seen, as I want to be seen. Recently, I heard of a white Florida teacher who stated that she was entitled to dislike blacks since she was attacked by a gang of blacks on a train in Atlanta as a teen. While I know that a teacher who carries such sentiments should never be teaching any children, I can still validate that her pain most likely is real. But I understand that her black students should not have to carry the weight of their teacher's childhood trauma and how that pain is expressed in her actions with them and other people of color. First, I would encourage the teacher to get therapy, but I would also encourage her to do some internal work by examining the experience in the light of her values as a member of society, perhaps as a mother or Christian, in the light of the values around fairness, equity, love, and truth. Many of us have painful and traumatic experiences. I certainly have mine. And with that trauma, I've also felt deeply about a certain culture and class of people. But those experiences will never define the person I have chosen to be in the world. When we visit these experiences, we must try to find a way to regain our center, which is always towards empathy and compassion. Not necessarily for others, but certainly for our own selves. Others might be the beneficiaries of our empathy, but certainly for our own health and well-being. So the saying, when we lift our brothers, sisters, and others, we lift ourselves. When we love our neighbors, indeed, we are loving ourselves. And if we feel that there are those who are outside of the bounds of where we can show compassion, just remember, Jesus went further than teaching mere love for one's neighbor. He encouraged his followers and others to even show empathy and compassion for their perceived enemies. And using the words of Abe Lincoln that reflect the words of Jesus to remind us we are not enemies but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic chords of memory will swell when again touched, as surely they will be by the better angels.